CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Genetically modified crops are grown around the world by approximately 17 million farmers, most of them in developing countries. In total, about 70 countries import or grow GMOs, including 7 countries in Africa, with South Africa, Sudan, Egypt and Burkina Faso leading in the commercialization of GM crops. Kenya is the latest country in Africa to authorize the cultivation and importation of genetically modified crops and animal feed in response to the worst drought to affect the East African region in 40 years. But concerns for human safety and the environment stand in the way. So this week on the program, we'll look into whether the adaptation of GMOs is the solution to the food crisis the continent is facing. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. Tanzania's Agricultural Minister Hussein Bashe says the country is still opposed to the use of biotechnology in food production, even as neighbors begin to grow genetically modified crops. Tanzania says it will impose stronger measures to prevent GMO food from finding its way across the border. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more.
Tanzania has long been skeptical of genetically modified crops. The government has health and safety concerns and aims to protect its smallholder farmers who account for the vast majority of its agricultural producers. But neighboring country Kenya has lifted a ban on GMO food production. Due to Kenya's food security challenges, GMO crops are now seen as a way to unlock food supply and ease hunger for millions of people in the country.
They compared with what they need. They looked at issues of climate change because you have much less land that can produce what you need. You also have the challenge of you need drought-resistant crops, and you have also biological stresses such as insects, pests, etc. to your crops, growing populations, growing youth populations, childhood malnutrition, and they figured maybe if they add this arm to the agricultural sector, it can improve, and let's see.
Tanzania says it's sticking to organic agriculture instead of genetically modified organisms methods in order to minimize the effects of climate change. But scientists say GMO farming is not inherently environmentally unfriendly. Despite Tanzania's approach, agricultural trade experts say Kenya's decision might affect the whole region.
And our borders are very porous. In a way, we cannot stop maize from Kenya coming to Tanzania. There is no way. As you're speaking right now, there are a lot of maize going to Kenya which are being done informally. And we expect the same way it will be done from Kenya to Tanzania. And since their maize will be very cheap, and as you know, farmers, they're always looking for cheaper things. Farmers, all citizens are looking for to reduce the cost of living. So in any way, maize from Kenya will come to Tanzania.
Biotech experts say, despite the concerns, careful measures are taken before a country allows the use of GMO agriculture. In 2021, Tanzania's government cancelled research trials involving genetically modified organisms. Instead, it put in place tighter scrutiny of improved genetically modified seeds. Authorities here say they are closely monitoring Kenya's decision to allow GMO foods, but they insist that it has no effect on Tanzania. It's not yet clear what extra measures the government will take to prevent GMO crops from entering the country. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, let's now bring in our panel, all joining us via Zoom. Joining us from Cape Town, James Rhodes, biosafety analyst from Biosafety South Africa. In Nairobi, Professor Richard Odwor, expert in molecular biology. And also joining us here in Nairobi, Anne Maina, National Coordinator, Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya. A warm welcome to you all and thank you for joining in this discussion. Professor Odwor, if I may start off with you. Let's start by understanding genetically modified organisms, because GM crops are reportedly grown around the world by approximately 17 million farmers. Most of these are in developing countries. In total, more than 70 countries import or grow GMOs. How much do we know about genetically modified organisms?
A lot is being said around GMO, and largely because most people don't understand it. And I have to admit at the onset that indeed a lot more of public participation and probably sensitization of people around this particular debate needs really to happen. What is important really to know is that it's not new. This technology, if you allow me to give you mathematics around it, is almost 40 years old. And this is my argument, Beatrice, that it's from 1998, from 96 to 98, when the first GM was commercialized, to now, we are talking about easily 25 years. And because it takes between 10 to 15 years to generate a GM product, so if you add the 15 to 25, you are almost easily talking about 40 years of really research and commercialization of this technology. So it's not really very new.
Right.
South Africa picked this by 1998. So the reality is that genetically modified organism is that organism that is improved by transferring of genes from a different source to its native. It could be from a different source. That is what we call transgenic. It can be from its relative or itself, what we are calling cisgenic. And now we are talking about genome editing, where we are not picking any gene from any place. We just improve the genes that are already the DNA of that particular source. So soon we will not be discussing issues around why are you taking genes from another source and bringing it here. So now, and this is already at advanced stage, we will be talking about the genome editing, and that will not require a lot more of transfer of genes.
And there has been a lot of hesitation to adopt GMOs in Africa to date. Now, according to the African Union crafted guidelines for GMO crops, only 7 countries in Africa have so far approved the commercial production of GMO crops. What are the concerns?
Our major concerns with regard to GMOs are 3: health implications of GMOs, 2, the social and economic implications. When you discuss on the health implications, scientists all over the world, and especially the independent European scientists, have raised concerns about the safety of GMO foods, and more linked to the fact that GMOs are linked to increased use of toxic pesticides and other inputs that have been questioned in terms of their safety. For example, there is the toxic ingredient glyphosate, most popularly known as Roundup. And this particular product has been classified by the World Health Organization as a possible carcinogen, class 2A. And the link with the growing of GMOs and the use of these toxic pesticides and herbicides is a key concern for us. When you discuss the issue of the social economic, for example, if you look at the issue of BT cotton or GMO cotton, the experience from farmers in Burkina Faso and the country had commercialized for a few years BT cotton, is that the cost of the seed was 40 times, GMO seed was 40 times the cost of the conventional varieties. This raised a lot of issues, and even the cost of the product and the quality. One of the reasons that it was banned in Burkina Faso is that the cotton lint was shorter,
Right.
and so the quality of the cotton in their prices in the world market went down for Burkina Faso because the quality was poorer. Most of the producers prefer a longer lint, and those are some of the issues that we've questioned. 3, issues of who owns the seed, who will control the seed. It's the multinational corporations, and that's why we keep on raising the issue of corporate capture. A lot of the research that is influenced, even when you hear Kenyan scientists working on issues of GMOs, a lot of it is coming from multinational corporations in America and other parts of the world. And this is just a testing ground, and for them is to capture the seed, capture the food market, and make exorbitant profit at the expense of our food sovereignty.
Right. James, let me get the feeling from South Africa here and go back to what Professor Odwor is talking about. What was the rationale, though, for South Africa's introduction of GMOs? And when you look at how it has evolved, have there been any concerns in South Africa regarding it, and how has that been dealt with?
Going back to, when South Africa, first started looking at adopting GM crops, very early on, the government recognized that GM technology could be used as a tool to assist with crop development and crop production. So they saw that it was a potential tool, but they realized early on that you need to manage, potential risks and look into those risks, to take a balanced approach. During crop research and development, there are various stages. And to do any of those stages, you have to, each step is stringently regulated. So
have there been any concerns, though, James, from the public? Have there been any concerns regarding the GMOs?
Absolutely. There have been concerns from the public, and those are actually taken into consideration during the decision-making process. So you take those concerns, you look at them, you evaluate them. We have processes on how to look at them. So whether it be an environmental concern, a food and feed safety concern, or if it's a social concern, those are taken into consideration and addressed during the decision-making process.
Right. So let me come back to you, Professor Odwor, because I want to specifically take a look at the Kenyan example, which had, banned cultivating of genetically modified crops, even its importation of food crops and animal feeds produced through biotechnology innovations. What is the argument today for Kenya lifting the ban?
One, we have had 10 years of building capacity if it is for regulatory agency like National Biosecurity Authority. We have had 10 years to tell the government that we are ready and there is capacity in terms of degrees that we have built and trained.
Right.
We have had 10 years to actually tell the world that we are ready. We have the facility, we have the capacity, we have a government that has been funding research. Even if there was a ban, and this is very interesting, Beatrice, there was a ban, but we are still getting funding to do genetic engineering for drought tolerance in our lab. I have been getting funding in this regard. So it sometimes becomes a little hypocritical, and I'm very bold when I'm saying this, because you cannot fund the research that you are banning the output. It's wrong. And that is the position that we have been telling the government that, listen, if it is wrong, ban it. That is why in world over, we don't have any organization called Cocaine Regulatory Authority because it is banned.
Right.
So anything that is banned, you don't have a regulatory agency. And in Kenya, we have National Biosecurity Authority that is supposed to regulate.
All right. Experts, though, are arguing that there is nothing to worry about. Are you satisfied about the regulatory measures and and the other measures that have been put in place to ensure that whatever technology is used in Kenya is safe?
No, we're not satisfied because look at our National Biosafety Authority, or just even look at regular testing that is done. We have, for the last several years, we have been seeing a lot of research that's being done, showing that our tomatoes, our sukuma wikis, kales are laced with a lot of toxic pesticides. The National Biosafety Authority does not have enough staff, enough resources, and funding from government to be able to monitor, follow up, and check on the socioeconomic. And so when you look at the issue of GMOs, who will be able to protect Kenyans in case things go haywire? The national government committed to allocate at least 2% of the GDP into agricultural research in Kenya. That has never happened. And so you're finding our National Biosafety Authority and even our national research agencies being forced to accept money from multinational corporations to support their research. And so you find whoever is paying the piper is playing the tune. And so this is skewed in terms of multinational corporations, profits, and we do not agree that Kenya is ready to accept GM.
All right. James, today South Africa is the 9th largest producer of GM crops in the world. What is the experience there, though? Have you seen an increase after introduction of GMOs? Has the economic base been made here?
In South Africa, we've approved 3 different GM crops. It's maize, cotton, and soybean. Cotton, we've got a very small production area, and it's not a huge amount of production. So I'm not going to focus on that. But with maize and soybean, it seems that GM techniques and the ways that it allows you to improve your farming methods has increased the production. So the farmers clearly see the benefit, and you can tell that by the huge level of adoption of GM crops, around 80 to 90% for maize and soybean. And indeed, cotton, it's around 100% but again, it's hard to gauge the impact of that because we are quite a small cotton producing country. So definitely the farmers have seen the benefits of this technology. And just going on with what Richard said earlier, these are just two traits that we've been looking at, and these traits have been developed elsewhere, and we use them because they give us the benefit. But there's a much huger or much larger potential to use this technology. So to address, social impacts for Africa. So African countries need to, use or develop the traits that they want to help address their social development goals. And this is where, there's a huge potential in developing these traits that address the things that we need to address.
All right, on that note, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we'll look into the effects of genetically modified crops on soil and biodiversity, and also find out whether GM crops are the key to global food security. Stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Let's continue with our discussion today. Still with me in Cape Town, James Rhodes; in Nairobi, Professor Richard Odwor; and also joining us, Anne Minor. Professor Odwor, Africa exports a large number of agricultural goods to European nations, and many European consumers do prefer to avoid GM crops. Is Kenya risking its organic export market by lifting the GMO ban, particularly when it comes to other African countries that do not use GMO?
If there is a country that still believes in organic foods, they will still get it. Why? Because there are mechanisms to get to know what is genetically modified and what is not. And most importantly, genetically modified foods will be labeled. In this country, we have a regulation on labeling. They must be labeled. So the person who wants organic will still get it. Even in the US, where this has been exposed to GM for all these years, still grows organic. I don't know why it felt that it's very special if it is in African countries. So the discussion around denying our farmers to export their organic, produce is really, in my opinion, far-fetched, because it's already happening. The US still grows the organic food, and they still can export it, and other countries, because it is labeled. So when we still follow the fidelity of law and regulations, we should still be good, but give others the opportunity. And James has already hinted to this,
right,
that it improves significantly the production and yields, and which is what we right now actually want to feed our people, not necessarily even to export. That's where the challenge is.
So, Anne, let me just come back to your first point of concern. Professor Odwor, though, is saying that countries still can grow organic. If we do not agree with the GMO, they can still grow organic, and GMO products will be labeled in supermarkets for the consumers anyway. How do you respond to that?
Coexistence is very difficult because the nature of agriculture in Kenya or in Africa is that we are smallholder farmers. And so me and my neighbor, we might have each an acre or 2 acres. And if you look at, for example, the US, which has been growing GMOs from 1996, there are still challenges related to the development of insect resistance. In South Africa, this particular variety of MON 810 maize developed insect resistance because even though they were planting it in large-scale farms, monocultures, the farmers did not adhere to one requirement that is required when you're growing GMOs. You have to have a buffer zone, like 5 meters around your farm to grow something else to avoid cross-pollination. So the nature of maize is cross-pollinated. So if I'm growing organic and my neighbor is growing maize that's not organic, there's cross-pollination. If you look at our seed laws, and there's been much talk about our seed laws. Our seed laws prohibit farmers from being breeders. It's more inclined to what they call the formal seed systems, the commercial seed producers. And so if you look at both laws and how they play each other, our farmers at the end of the day will be disadvantaged. Number two, the organic farmers cannot coexist with the GMOs unless in some countries like Philippines, they have maybe a district or a county that declares itself GMO free. And those are things that have not been put in place. And that's why we're saying Kenya is not ready for GMOs. We need a moratorium, and we need to ensure that Kenyans can have a choice. The US, GMOs is the cheapest. The rich people go for organic, even in South Africa. How are we going to manage this? Yet Kenya has not become food secure. It will be the poor who will be dealing with issues of cancer and other diseases because of consuming food that's laced with toxic pesticides.
Right. Professor Odward, this raises a fundamental question of raising productivity and raising production, because millions of people are facing food insecurity in Africa each year. Is the adaptation of GMOs, in your view, though, a solution to the food crisis facing Africa? Is GMO a viable alternative to solving our perennial food insecurity, for instance?
Any person who says that GMO is a silver bullet, it's the panacea to food security, is really not correct. And I want to say this here so that people don't confuse. It's just one of the complementary, tools that should be used to complement the existing technologies so that we are able to increase food production. If your interest is pests and you are making BT cotton, for instance, is against pests, you must still have water. You must still, weed the maize so that it is, it gives you the yield. It's not that if my maize is insect tolerant like BT maize and you don't water it, it will still give you yield. Hell no, that doesn't happen. So the thinking here, it should be, what is the trait in question? And what percentage of yield is affected by, say, insects or disease or a drought or floods and all these things? Once you have quantified that, so if you pick pest and it kills it probably 30%, then you have just redeemed your 30%. So I hear people say this is a silver bullet and everything. No, it is one of the complementary tools that are out there. And we are not claiming 100% food security just by you having a GM seed, which you are not watering, you are not weeding, and those traits were not incorporated in the genome. That won't happen.
James, as an agriculturalist, with your background in zoology, what are the effects, though, on soil and biodiversity here?
Again, we're going to have to just look at what crops have been commercialized in the last 20 years. So if you look at herbicide tolerance, one of the main benefits to the soil there is that it allows farmers to adopt something which is called no-till or minimal till strategies, which means that you don't have to plow up your fields between crops. And what that allows is you conserve the microbiome, the microbes in the soil, and you keep the nutrients in the soil. So there's been much research over the decades looking at soil health, and on the whole, it shows a benefit to the soil communities in agricultural fields. As far as the BT crop, BT is insect resistance, so certain insect pests that are targeted by the BT die. So what this allows is farmers to spray less insecticides on their crops. And again, the review studies, there have been multitudes of studies over the time, and it shows that on the whole, using BT technology over conventional spraying is beneficial to the insect communities in the agricultural fields. So in both those instances, there are benefits to the soil health or to the insect biodiversity in the fields.
So I want to get your final thoughts and start off with you, James, because there should be a message here, or there is a message here. What message should there be for farmers, for consumers, for policymakers, for governments as we continue with this GMO discussion?
my experience with farmers, you don't need to give them a message. They want the technologies. They're not really concerned about how those technologies get into their seed. So in general, farmers are very, adopting of GM technologies. As far as consumers go, I would say it's important to know that it doesn't matter where in the world you are. If you have an approved GM food in front of you, it's gone through a huge regulatory pathway to get there, to make sure that it is safe to eat, that it is safe to grow, because GM technology is stringently regulated both at the international level, at the Cartagena Protocol, or by your local national laws and regulations. So it's hugely regulated, looking at safety, environmental safety and food safety and social aspects. And then as far as policy makers go, it's about recognizing that this is, like Richard said, it's another tool in our toolbox which we can use to address issues that we have with crop development and crop production. So it's an important tool, because it's a tool that can do many different things. And it's important to streamline the regulatory, pathway to allow, especially locally developed crops addressing local needs, so that those can reach the farmers, so that they can use them to produce the crops that they want to produce, and that consumers get the kind of crops they need.
Right. So, Anne, as an opponent of GM organisms, what would you say? What would be your key message to farmers, to consumers, to government and other stakeholders?
My message is for the consumers to remain alert and raise their voice. Kenya is not ready for GMOs, and we should be clear to government. We do not want to consume GMOs. Our farmers, we want to continue working with them, growing our local varieties. Sorghum is one crop that the US is now focusing on as a superfood because of its nutritional qualities. Growing up, we have grown up with these crops. We can diversify for nutrition and food security, and that is my clarion call. And also to government, kindly listen to Kenyans. Kenyans do not want GMOs. We want you to invest in our diversity, we want you to invest in our nutrition and not genetic modification.
All right. Professor Odwor, you have the final word.
Our scientists here are not planning to kill any of our relatives. We also live in this country and in this world. We are not here to kill anyone. We are just trying to look for alternative approaches that can supplement existing, tools for purposes of increasing food security. So my surety, what I can assure my people in Kenya is that, one, we have a robust regulatory agency that was established in 2010. It will make sure that there is sufficient regulation. And also, it's not that when James has already told you that we only in South Africa, just 3 traits, just soybean, cotton, and BT maize. Those are the only 3 that are very popular. It is not like when we have lifted the ban, then it will be everything that is, flocking the country. No, National Biosafety Authority will regulate from importation to its, decommercialization. It's a whole lot more of a bigger basket of things. So let people not be worried. Even right now, I can tell you there has been, the ban has been lifted, but the planting of BT cotton is not still happening because we still have to bulk the seeds. So these things take time. There is no cause for alarm, and we are here to also monitor very closely. If there is anything that would threaten, the lives of our people, we will also cite it out. That is how research actually develops. Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you very much indeed. But that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our panel of experts. In Cape Town, James Rhodes, biosafety analyst from Biosafety South Africa. In Nairobi, Professor Richard Odwor, expert in molecular biology, and also joining us, Anne Maina, National Coordinator, Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and Twitter, and you can also watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more Talk Africa. For me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi, until next time, goodbye.